We are ready to reconvene. I think the score is still 1-0 bad guys. And we are going to item number 5, administration, CFAO Leonard.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'll do a quick administrative update
Yeah, sorry.
in place of Director Day. Last Friday, we received the $4.9 million payment representing MGM's annual slot fees, and a portion of the assessment as was included in the license determination conditions. They paid it within the 5 days that they had agreed to pay. For a hiring update, we have 3 open financial investigation positions posted. We have a good group of resumes and candidates already in. We have 1 financial investigator who's currently going through the background check process. So since our last meeting, I don't know if it was a conversation that we had or just better outreach. I know that Troop D's been trying to get the position posted in different areas. We've got better interest, and we are moving forward with those positions. We have 1 paralegal position posted for the legal department. We're still searching for a gaming lab manager, but may have identified a way to begin building the laboratory operations to a contracted position while we keep looking for a full-time. And in the racing division, we have completed 37 seasonal hires. We only have 1 in the background check process, which should complete the hiring process. And then we have a full-time administrative assistant position posted for the racing director. That completes the administrative update.
Do you know how long our background checks are taking these days?
I don't know how long they're taking, but we have streamlined the process. I know Troop D's worked with the IEB and with the racing division, especially on the seasonal positions, where if we've done some of the background in the past, they speed through the process. I know that we have shortened on the IRS side of it, where we only go back 5 years versus 7 years, so that we can get an online application versus waiting the 2 to 3 weeks that it was taking to get the hard copies in. So we've done as much as possible to streamline the process.
Great.
To the extent you can, or maybe Director Wells can give us an update later, I didn't realize we're looking for 3 positions in the financial investigation arena.
So it'd actually be 4. So that
4.
office, when it's fully staffed, will be 5 positions. It's a director and 4 analysts. We're having a hard time finding a director position, so what we're trying to do is hire the analysts and let Karen either promote from within if we get someone who's more qualified in the group, or just manage during the process. But these salaries are much lower than the cost we get charged for forensic accountants by consultants.
Right. And is the idea, or I guess it must be both, investigating the vendors that are already licensing employees,
so this is
ongoing?
So this is a high period for the IEB and the licensing division, getting vendors in, getting employees in once we have people start opening up operations.
Great.
Thank you.
I thought we were looking for a lawyer as well. Is that down the line at some point?
So that hasn't been posted yet. We did shift the money around in the budget. I just don't think the
That's
job
what
description
I was thinking of. Okay, we've
the
shifted
job
the money
description
around. Okay,
hasn't been pulled together.
all right.
Any chance Artem can come back?
It's we love that. I feel it a lot myself. He helped me draft a lot of the scope of work for every single contract we do. So I'm currently feeling it right now. But it'd be nice to have him back.
Yeah. Okay.
On the budget update, on May 29th, we presented a $29.3 million budget to the Commission. It was comprised of $24.5 million in spending for gaming operations and $4.8 million in spending on racing operations. Since that time period, we've been asked to review contracted costs to see where full-time equivalents are a more prudent use of resources, which resulted in a shift of $380,000 from consulting costs to FTEs within the IEB and legal divisions. But for FY15, they're going to be budget neutral due to the level of training we're expecting. We're going to have to send these investigators out with our consultants for the first, I'd say, 2 to 3 months until they get a handle on the right protocols and the right information they're looking for. So we'll have some duplication of cost for a certain time period, but then we think in the long run this will save us because we get those really cost prohibitive consultant fees off, and we just have a base cost built into our budget on a going forward basis. We were asked to conduct comparison research between jurisdictions that use central management systems and those that do not. That's resulted in the team investigating this matter to schedule site visits in Ohio with the Ohio Casino Control Commission to see how it operates in a pen facility that doesn't use a central monitoring system. They just give eyes into their back-end slots management system to the operators and to the regulators. And then we're also going to visit Maine to see how that system is used. Maine has a very low budget, and they use the central monitoring system there to do a huge portion of their regulatory control. So they have a $2 million budget, and $1 million of it is comprised of their central monitoring system. So I think they only have 5 or 6 FTEs that go along with that. So we'll take a look at one that's using it almost solely for regulatory environment, and then another one that's not using it at all. And then we hope to be done with our research, come back and present to you towards the end of July on the 3 scenarios that you asked for. 1, a non-central management role. 2, an environment we're just aggregating data almost in a data warehouse of our own. And then a 3rd where it would be a central management environment. And then you also asked that we meet with the slot parlor licensee.
Excuse me, I know you'll, but the 5 in Maine are for the 2 casinos.
Yes, for 2 casinos. So there are about 1,700 slot machines between the 2 casinos.
Right.
I think when we talked to the executive director, he said it was him, 2 clerks, 2 auditors, and 1 or 2 enforcement agents. So it's a really slimmed down model that they have there.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's the extent of the commission? That's
the
altogether?
extent.
That's it?
And the rest, they rely on the central monitoring system.
Okay. Be fascinating to see the 3 models.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've asked us to meet with the slot parlor licensee to review the proposed FY15 budget. We found these meetings very helpful. I think that Penn was able to articulate some of the concerns most of the licensees are having, central management system being one of them, our staffing patterns being another. They shared with us some models of other regulatory boards and what their staffing patterns were, and we are trending on the high side. So I think it'll be something that we watch out for. We've committed to coming back to meet with them shortly after the slots parlor opens to see how the experience is, as well as seek their input each year as we build the budget before we present it to the public. See what they think about the staffing patterns, see what they think about law enforcement patterns there, and whether we have downtime, wasted time. And finally, we were asked to post the FY15 budget recommendations for public comment. We did not receive any public comment within the comment period, so my presentation would have been much shorter. However, late Tuesday, we received comment from one of the Region A applicants, Wynn Resorts. The packets were already prepared for this presentation, so you don't have those in there, but I will speak to them, and we can always post them after this meeting. So they had 8 points that they wanted to discuss. The first point was Wynn Resorts thought that the 2 places we compared, Michigan and Pennsylvania, weren't good areas to compare to. They thought Ohio would have been a better baseline to compare to. They have 4 licensees operating there, 4 facilities. And they contended that the budget we're presenting is high. The Ohio budget is only at $13.4 million while they have 4 operations open. And $8.4 million of that is spent on salaries, which leads to, I think, $75,000 per full-time employee, which is about $15,000 lower than what our current salary numbers are. So as I presented at my first meeting when I did a comparison, the devil's in the details with any of these legislations and budgets. We have-
Question, Derek?
Yes.
I know that Ohio uses, they do not have separate licensing. They have a statewide licensing system,
So-
as well as IT. So there are functions that they do not do independently.
And that's the devil in the details of any of these laws. Their extent of law enforcement coverage isn't the same. Their Attorney General's office doesn't have the same requirements. They're not going through a building process right now that has oversight project management costs built in. If you take a look at the CPI, we grew 22% faster over a 30-year period than Ohio did, which is, once again, your most modest review, which is why contracts are usually reflected that way. So if you added that into a salary, which no one ever says to, but I'm just going with the most modest review, we'd only be off by about 4,600, and I think that's a cost of living here. You could talk to David Acosta, the difference between cost of living here and cost of living in Ohio. So I don't think we're off by that much when it comes to salary, and if you think about our organization right now, we're top heavy. We have all of our directors hired. Once we start filling in line level positions, our cost per salary is going to drop drastically. One of the other points they brought up was that the projection set forth in the FY15 budget would be the second largest in the United States on a per employee and per casino basis. They referenced Nevada. They also made some references, and this is problem with not being able to have the data in a timely fashion. They referenced some things in their attachment that are contradictory to the research I did when it came to Pennsylvania and Michigan. They had the fee that Pennsylvania is charging at $25 million, where it's 33 currently, and in Michigan. They had the Pennsylvania assessment off. It's really, Pennsylvania assesses 1.5 right now for their overhead, where they're actually spending at 2%. So they're just, with any of these things, the devil's in the details. So I give caution to some of the information that's in the attached charts.
Are you going to go through all of this at some point, Derek, and respond
Yes.
to them as well as
Yes, I
to
will. I'll
us?
sit down with them.
Okay.
I just wanted to
Okay.
talk to it right now, and then I'll provide a written response and sit down with the applicants.
Okay.
They also questioned the inclusion of the central monitoring system, which we've heard consistently from everyone. So we're going to come back and report to the commission. They asked whether the costs for licensing in RFA2, which I'm assuming for Region C, would be billed to all of the licensees, or if it would just be based back to the particular applicants, similar to how the process is going now. That process doesn't change. It's billed back to the particular applicants. I have a $1.2 million revenue source in the budget, which would just a guesstimate at that point, and expenditures tying out to that 1.2 million for Region C. If we don't spend that much, we don't bring in that much revenue. So it's
revenue neutral.
revenue neutral, and it doesn't have any effect on the current licensees or current applicants. They had a question with respect to vendor registration, and the exact question was, assuming that the applicant's background procedures are acceptable to the MGC, we propose eliminating any duplicative investigations by the MGC and thereby reducing the amounts attributable to such investigations. I've talked to David Acosta, and we don't really understand what this question is, so we need to sit down with them and get better insight into what they're looking for. But I think with anything we do, we look to reduce duplicative processes, and as long as we're not hurting the regulatory environment, we'd be open to those discussions. They asked for details to the $1 million in the Ombudsman's office.
I'd whack that one.
Me too. Come on, Mr. Chairman.
It's funny, we just talked about that, John and I did. So out of that $1 million, 700,000 of it is for grants that we're anticipating as part of the just application process for Region C. Based on timeline shifts and what could be happening, we can cut that in half, but once again, it's revenue neutral. We charge that back to the actual applicant that this is going to be happening to in Region C. It goes back out to the community, and it's a wash. So it wouldn't change the assessment, it'd just change our bottom line of what our budget is for the year. They asked about the 3.9 million allocated for problem gambling and whether there's any crossover with that, with the Public Health Trust Fund contribution. I just want to clarify that we are not going to be making the $5 million assessment to the Public Health Trust Fund until FY16. So yes, there are duplicated costs in here. We anticipate a big portion of this being shifted off to that assessment, so it won't be duplicated in future years.
Well, it's never duplicated. I mean, when you say it's duplicated, it makes it sounds like they're
Yes,
paying
I was
twice.
Yeah,
They aren't.
They're not.
no, they aren't.
Once the Public Health Trust Fund has an assessment in it, any other assessment will be eliminated. Any other costs will be eliminated.
Correct, we'll shift those costs over to
Right.
the Public Health Trust Fund. Only 205,000 of that 3.9 million is going towards staff salaries for the problem, salaries and fringe-related benefits for the problem gambling unit.
It's mostly the research project.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then they asked with respect to the 1.8 million allocated for state police, clarification as to how that will increase when additional facilities come on. And that's a good question. We haven't really worked out that MOU, and as those facilities begin to come open, I think that the IEB will work with state police and figure out what the right staffing patterns are. And we'll have some idea of whether we were too high or too low based on the slots parlor and our conversations with Penn at that point.
Now, that figure includes, doesn't it, the funding of certain positions in the graduating, in the academy?
So the
that
1.8 million pays for a trooper class training of 10 troopers, their break-in period, a 12-week break-in period. It also includes the cost of our 7 staff that do all the investigations into employees and backgrounds checks. It includes $250,000 for about what we're projecting to be 4,500 fingerprint sets this year at about $50 a piece. And it also includes a small piece of overtime that we negotiated in the MOU. So that's a...
It's a budget figure, it could change, and we'll refine
Yeah.
it as we go along, too.
Yeah. So that's all the comments. Once again, I will draft up some responses and meet with the applicants on these and hopefully get them posted to the website.
MGM didn't comment?
MGM did not comment.
Okay. Well, I think you've handled this really well, Derek, really thoroughly, thoughtfully, carefully. You know, I said last time, and this is obvious, and I don't think you were going to be prone to this, but let's be sure that it does look like, sort of very presumptively, that we are heavy, maybe, and we're going to take some time, think it through, but let's just be very careful that we do, in fact, think it through and don't lose the flexibility. It's never easy cutting back once you've done it, but let's just don't forget that that's important. But I think you've done a really good job.
And we have been very thoughtful, and we want to continue to listen because we don't want to become an outlier, and we don't want to be thought of as a non-business friendly environment. So we are going to listen to the input. We are going to listen to hard data that says during these hours we saw nothing going on. We don't understand why you need this. We're going to listen to what Ohio has to say about a central management system versus non-central management system. I think their deputy director worked in Kansas where they had a central management system, and from what I understand, he's all about not going with a central management system. So it'll be good to hear every side of the coin and present a full picture for the commission to think about. And one other piece I wanted to note that one last adjustment that we did make, and I've noted it before, but I want to put it in this final piece before I ask you to vote on a budget, was that we reduced revenue projections by $377,000 to account for my mistake the first time around of including a full fee for the slots parlor for region, and for the slots cost for Region A, where our regulations clearly don't allow for that. It has to be prorated the point that we make the determination of an award. So that dropped the revenue down by $377,000, which brought the assessment up by that corresponding amount. So instead of asking for a $20.4 million assessment, I'm in front of you asking for a $20.78 million assessment.
Don't worry about that.
Okay. So based on that information, I recommend approving a $29.3 million FY15 budget with the following provisions. Include in that budget the cost of a central management system and a cohort study, but do not allow us to spend for those until we bring back information to you and you have a chance to formally approve them. Assess $20.78 million on licensees, but only bill in 6-month increments based on the anticipated need for those 6 months. As I reported at the beginning of this, Region B, we gave that same option to during the license determination and negotiation period. They agreed to it. We billed them and they paid that amount. I've had discussions with Penn that I'd probably do the same thing if you approve that, so this isn't new information to them. And Region A is still pending a license determination, so I wouldn't make a pitch for what to do there. That's up to their licensing negotiations with the commission. I also recommend billing the slot parlor for the full year cost of their approved slot machines, the same thing we did to MGM, and they paid that. And then bill Region A, licensee, the slot fee prorated based on the date of the determination of their license.
Great.
I think it's important perhaps to emphasize something that you mentioned, which is the assessment versus the yearly budget. The assessment will be predicated on the costs that we know and are, reasonably certain will happen between now and the end of the year.
Correct.
Which is what we've done. The discussions we had with MGM and then the proration that applies to the other licensee and the potential future licensee.
Correct. So without going into huge detail on it, we have a $24.5 million budget. We'd only be looking to assess 20.78, which means we have revenues coming in throughout the year. The way I'd take a look at it is, and some of those costs only begin after January, and I think it equates to about $4 million of our budget has costs that begin only after January. So that would drop our $24 million budget down to a $20 million budget. Then if you back out the revenues that we're anticipating and the slots fees are the large majority of it, you bring those in and all of a sudden you're down to like 16. So now you're assessing for half of that for the year, 8 million, 8.6 I think it is. So 8.3, 8.6, somewhere around there that we'd be assessing on the industry in this we'd be billing on the industry in this first 6-month bill of the $20 million assessment. So you get your prorated share of that.
Right.
Do you want to move the action?
Sure. I, based on the presentation and all the work that you've done up until today, but has been happening for a while now, I recommend that the Commission approve the budget, the yearly budget as presented, as well as the assessment to our licensees as presented and discussed here today.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Good job. We now go to Ombudsman Ziemba for the $1 million budget.
Every penny.
Recently reduced, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today, the Commission is continuing its discussion of Regency and its schedule. Since our last meeting, we solicited further comments about whether the Commission should open up Regency to new competition, whether the region Regency RFA 2 application date should be extended to March 5th, 2015, or some earlier or later date, and how the commission may further promote competition in the region. We received numerous comments, including comments from communities considering hosting a facility and companies hoping to develop a facility in the region. A summary of those comments is included in your packets. Also included in your packets are 2 charts that provide further analysis of application dates. The first chart shows 3 application dates that the Commission has discussed and when a host community agreement would need to be executed in order to meet those dates. The second chart shows 3 new potential Regency application dates that, among other possibilities, may potentially enable the non-successful applicant in Region A to compete in Region C if it chooses to do so. Please note, we have no indication that any applicant in Region A would have any interest in Region C. They both obviously are fully engaged in a very tough competition that they both plan to win. Before getting into a discussion of the charts, I'm going to ask Director Wells to provide you any update on background checks in Region C. As a reminder, under our current revised application schedule, background checks were hoped to be complete by August 18th of this year. Director Wells.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Commission, Mr. Chairman. I'm beginning to sound like a broken record coming before you on this issue. Once again, my update is basically the same, that the IEB has yet to receive from any potential applicant for Region C a completed package which outlines a deal that would lead to a resort casino for Region C. So I am in the same position I've been in for months and months, just waiting. So I do have a recommendation for the Commission as we go forward. Whatever the Commission decides as far as timing, my recommendation is that the Commission set a deadline for the applicant to submit a package to the IEB of their deal, and then give the IEB discretion to determine that the deal is substantially complete so that I can report back to the Commission more accurately about a timetable for completion of the investigation. As it stands right now, you know, the target is that I have this completed in August. I can't, imagine having that completed in August, even if I get some additional individual qualifiers going through the forms that have not yet been completed and their tax returns, things like that. I don't think will be happening by the August date. The BED forms that any other companies that we would have to investigate are necessarily more complicated, and therefore that would additionally take more time. Plus there is the time for the completion of the report. I have to review the report. I have to give the report to the Commission. The Commission has to review the report. We have to set a date, and then we have to have a hearing. Whether it be a public hearing because there are no conditions on suitability, or if there's an adjudicatory hearing that even takes more time. So I don't see us making that deadline as it is right now. And for efficiency's sake, I think it may be a good idea for the Commission to at least consider setting a deadline that any potential applicants, if we want to move forward in Region C, they would have to get me a package by a certain date, and then I can report back to the Commission. If I indicate it's substantially complete, I can move forward. If it's not, if they want to address the Commission or come before the Commission to contest that, then I would suggest they would be free to do so. But you can understand it's frustrating to be waiting for months or something to come to completion. And I do believe setting a deadline is the most effective way to get things moving. So that would be my recommendation at this point.
Is that under the current Phase 2 deadline? What you're suggesting is a hard Phase 1 deadline. Is that a good characterization
well,
of it?
I would say for it's somewhat similar to what we did before. What I want to avoid is the situation where the applicant gives, for example, get applicant A, for example, gives me a package, but they don't have a partner that can really contribute the necessary equity to make this happen. I'll know that pretty quickly based on the initial forms, and I'll be able to tell the Commission that. Now, we could just go forward, and then at the end, if you set a deadline suitability, I could just report out that they would not be suitable because they don't have the equity. That is an option, but I think it would be helpful for the Commission to get an earlier picture of what's going on in the region, and maybe they would be able to have a more informed decision of what the commission wants to do going forward. It's an option for your consideration.
Right. No,
this
I
option-
understand the concept,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to overlay it with our current Phase 2 deadline, whether it applies or not.
You mean as far as whether we can make the deadline?
Well, we have a current deadline, Phase 2.
Right.
Sounds like it's very, very tight because
Yeah.
you don't have apparently somebody with a full set of partners,
Correct.
currently.
Right.
So our September 25th,
September 23rd.
I'm sorry, September 23rd deadline looks very tight for two big reasons. We'll probably get into the second one in a minute, but the one that you're referring to, because there's not a lot of investigation time, adjudicatory or hearing time, if we need it, between now and the actual deadline for all intents and purposes, the September 23rd.
Yeah.
So what I think you're suggesting is that whatever date we do set for the final application deadline,
Yep.
that we should also set a firm background check deadline. Call it 90 days, whatever, 90 days before. So effectively, this deadline is already passed from the first.
Right. Well,
So if we have on the table a proposition of March 15th or March something or other. So your suggestion is if we pick, for the sake of discussion, March 15th as the final application deadline, that we also pick a deadline by which time applicants would have to have their background checks into you.
Correct.
well,
We have at the moment, just to make this a little bit more concrete, we have one Regency applicant, right?
Applicant,
We
not
have one
applicant.
Applicant.
that
Applicant.
submitted as part of Regency. Correct.
One entity that's paid $400,000 and filed some papers,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
That's what I mean by applicant.
Yep.
Have we done a background investigation of that?
Yes.
So that piece is done.
Well, I mean, it's not in final report form because.
No, I understand that, but-
But yes, we have been working
so-
on that and done as much as we can do on those
Right.
pieces. Correct.
So if, and I'm just trying to make sure I understand where we are. If that applicant were to pair with somebody as to whom we've already done a background investigation as well, and there are no changes,
Correct.
two big ifs,
Correct.
but if both of those occur, then all that's left to do, and I don't minimize the text,
Yes.
but all that's left to do is write up the results and present them to us.
Correct.
Right? Okay. All right. So that shows the best possible case that could happen.
Correct.
All right. Got it.
However, that same party would have to have negotiated a host community agreement.
Oh, no, I'm just talking about background.
No, I know,
investigation.
yeah.
I understand all
Yeah.
that.
well, that's the second piece that I was alluding to
Yeah,
in a
no, and
minute.
I think we need to talk about that piece. I just wanted to get the phase one, the RFA one piece
Right.
Okay.
understood.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I can proceed. So as I mentioned, among the excellent comments that we received, some communities and companies wishing to build in Regency provided comments. We also received a letter from Representative Kazera from the 11th Bristol District that includes City of New Bedford and Acushnet. I know you have those comments, so I'll just briefly summarize the subset of these comments from applicants and companies and communities. The City of New Bedford asked the Commission to extend the current deadline to a date subsequent to November 14th, a date that would allow a host community referendum to be held on the date of the November 4th general election. The city voiced its opposition to opening the process to new applicants or extending the deadline beyond this year because it could threaten the commercial viability of Regency, according to the city. Representative Kazera urges the Commission to extend the application deadline to March 23rd, 2015, to promote further competition and to enable the unsuccessful bidder in Region A to consider a site in Region C. Ken Fiola, representing the City of Fall River, expressed support for an extension to March to the Region C application deadline. He expressed opposition to lowering the minimum $500 million destination resort construction requirement. The City of Taunton requested that the Commission not extend its Region C deadline, noting the progress of the tribe and that the market demonstrates that a commercial casino in Region C is not economically viable. The town of Bridgewater urges the commission to extend the current application deadline to open up the region to new applicants and to make alterations to the commission's minimum capital requirements. KG New Bedford LLC expresses opposition to allowing new applicants to file an RFA1 application because it believes it would be unfairly prejudicial to existing applicants. KG expressed support for a deadline extension of 90 days, effectively at the end of December, and urged the commission to include land costs and carried interest costs in the calculation of the $500 million minimum capital investment. And the Claremont and Clairvest Group recommends that the commission extend the current deadline to March 2015. It further urges the commission to open up the region to new applicants, enabling the group to compete in Region C. Finally, urge the commission to revise its minimum capital investment requirements. So with those comments as a backdrop, I asked the commission to turn to the first chart titled Host Community Agreements Region C. It's the pink, blue, and yellow chart.
John, can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
Because from a couple of the comments relative to the minimum capital investment, I gather that there is a bit of a misunderstanding as to what we have discussed. I think that what we discussed last time, and I think what we should continue to consider, maybe now or later, is the costs that are included in the minimum capital investment, not changing that amount by itself. Some people who provide comments clearly understand that concept, and I'm glad. But there's a couple that do not, and I want to make sure that they understand that at least I have never talked about lowering the minimum capital investment from 500 to anything less. We couldn't. Actually, we couldn't. It's a requirement of the legislation. The leeway that we do have is as to certain costs that can be included in that calculation. And I think we should continue to, there is one particular cost that we have clear direction from the legislature as to having that broad discretion, and that's the land cost. It is very expressly written there that we could decide to include it or not. So far we had decided not to, but it doesn't mean that we cannot change that. So I just wanted to state that for the record.
And Commissioner, you're obviously exactly correct on the regulation. Perhaps the comment was a bit of a shorthand, but one thing I will additionally note is that regardless of whatever our requirement is, what is included, what is excluded, in a host community agreement, and a community retains the ability to set a higher threshold regardless of what our minimum would be. So with those comments as a backdrop, I ask you to turn to the Host Community Agreements Region C chart that's in your packet. This chart shows the 3 further application dates that the Commission has already discussed over the last couple of months. As we noted previously, the 60-day deadline for the execution of a host community agreement for the current September 23rd date is close to expiration on July 14th. Yes, that's correct, chart. Similarly, the 90-day HCA deadline for the second application date, October 17th, 2014, is also about to expire on July 8th. Only the third option, November 17th, has an HCA 90-day deadline that is not approaching in the next few weeks. A host community agreement would need to be concluded by early August to meet the 90-day date. Please note that none of these dates factor in local procedural requirements such as city council schedules or other pre-vote scheduling requirements. The second chart that we have for you.
Sorry, John, on that chart,
Yep.
just so that I'm clear, 60 days back, July 14 is 60 days from September 23rd.
It is 60 days back, actually, from 10 days back. So,
Okay.
because the theory here is that
Yes.
by the day before the application date, there would have to be a certification of the
vote.
election results.
Yep.
And so you would have to have your referendum 10 days prior to that certification date, and then you would have to schedule your referendum 60 days before that actual referendum. So that brings you back to July 14th.
Okay.
Or June 14th, which is already passed with the 90 days back.
Yes.
Do you know whether there are intense negotiations on an HCA underway?
I understand that there's been a lot of discussions in some of the communities on HCA's. There's been public reports on that, to the best of my knowledge, and we've pretty routinely checked. No host community agreement has been executed. Indeed, part of the background checks would be necessary for part of that, if people are trying to determine who the parties are that would be part of that host community agreement. So in short, what that means is that I don't believe that any host community agreements have been executed. There is a potential, there is a possibility that one could be executed within the time frame of July 14th, but
you
given
get-
some of the comment letters, I don't know that that'd be likely. But we don't know that. But in some of the communities that have expressed an interest in having the deadline extended, they've at least expressed that they would like more time to get through the process. But I don't have a definitive, it is impossible to meet that date.
Yeah.
So the second chart is titled Additional Potential Region C RFA2 Application Dates. This shows, as I mentioned, the dates, 3 dates well after the conclusion of the Region A competition. The chart shows the number of days, you can see that in the green, the number of days between the potential application date and our projected Region A award date of September 12th. All of these 3 dates exceed 100 days, which is the amount of days necessary for a full 90 days prior to a local referendum, plus the 10-day vote certification period. We've also shown the 3 potential award dates using an application evaluation period of approximately 140 days. So if we had application dates of January 30, 2015, February 27, 2015, or March 27, 2015, you'll see in that pink line, those are the potential award dates. And again, that award date is based on 140 days, which is what we have penciled in for the anticipated award date based on a September 23rd date. And what that shows is it anticipates at least one arbitration going for the full length, but it is the minimum, basically the minimum number of days that we would need to complete that process. And, as we've seen, certain things do come up. But I think 140 days is a good indication of the number of days that would be necessary for an evaluation. So
Can I ask a question? I'm having trouble figuring out this. What's the green horizontal represent?
So the green is if we have an application date of January 30th, 2015, for example, there would be 140 days after our anticipated award of the Region A license. So what that reflects is if a Region A applicant were interested in competing for Region C, they would have 140 days to put together an application
Got it.
before us.
Okay.
And that 140 days would include 100 days that would be necessary to complete the local referendum process if they opted for a 90-day notice period.
Okay, and then the blue,
And so what we have here in the blue, consistent with what we talked about a couple minutes ago with Director Wells, if we do open up the region to further competition,
Region C.
Region C, to further competition, we would have to establish a new RFA1 deadline. And all that is referenced here is that October 10th, 2014 RFA1 date. That is just simply a calculation of, it is about a month after we would make our determinations on Region A to enable the Region A, the non-successful Region A applicant to put together whatever would be necessary for RFA1. And so under this theory, obviously,
But can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Why would the Region A unsuccessful applicant have to put together an RFA1?
so I was just about to get it. So,
Oh.
so on this issue, so obviously RFA1 would just be for new applicants. They would have to fill out all of the BED forms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what we talked about was that it might make a lot of sense for the commission to establish a deadline for everyone competing in the process to have their teams together. What we've seen in this process in Region C is that there's obviously been a lot of discussion about partnering between different groups and how they're going to work together and find a specific community. What we are thinking is that it might make sense for us to have a very specific deadline for the non-new applicants in the region, for us to know who they're partnered with, so we can make sure that we can complete their background check in enough time for the application, for RFA2 application. So you'd have all of the new applicants, they'd apply by October 10th, and if indeed there is a Region A applicant that wants to compete in Region C, we would want to know that it has a team by October 10th, 2014, so we can properly evaluate any of their backgrounds. Now, October 10th, 2014 is purely a plug date, and it just reflects basically about a month after the Region A competition. Whether or not that is sufficient to enable a Region A applicant, if there ever were one, to put together a team to compete in Region C, I'm not quite certain a month would do it, but that's basically the earliest possible date that we could explore. So with that general background, I thought for the point of the Commission's discussion, I would just break down a number of questions that result from our solicitation and maybe a way of approaching all of these questions. I forget what it's called. Director Blue, Council Blue always comes up with like a roadmap for decision. What do you call that?
Decision tree.
Decision tree. So I have 5 separate questions, and hopefully in order that potentially they could be discussed. Number 1, should the Commission vote now to further extend the Region C application date? And if so, what RFA2 date would be best to promote competition? Third question, should the region be open to new applicants? And if so, should the Commission establish a requirement that both new applicants and existing applicants must have its application team in place by a new date, essentially a new RFA1 date? And then question number 5, should the Commission revisit its decision on the minimum capital investment? So in that decision tree, I guess the first question is, should the Commission vote now to further extend the Region C application date, and then soon thereafter, if so, what would be a good date to promote competition?
Can I get back to that in a minute? There's an additional question that I think we should think about as part of question 3 or 5. And that is a decision we made a little while ago relative to restricting the field to applicants as opposed to qualifiers. What we have seen is that these deals come together with multiple parties, sometimes with the expectation that there's a future party, but there's an LLC that becomes the applicant. And that, in my estimation, sort of, only gives Director Wells a lot of difficulties trying to figure out whether that applicant is complete, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in order to get some flexibility, whether we do this now or later, open it up or not, we need to think about ways to incorporate qualifiers, not necessarily just applicants as part of the.
But if we do, in his decision tree is the question, should we open it up to new applicants?
Right.
If we open it up to new applicants, as a practical matter, that includes qualifiers. So it would accomplish the same purpose. It would be a narrow, you could narrow it and say only open it to qualifiers. But if you open them to new applicants, you would include qualifiers.
And I think we did this because our regulation talks about, you don't have to pay us another fee is based on the regulation saying what the deadline for applicants was, right? We're still working off that January 1, 2013 application RFA 1 deadline.
That's right.
Which brings me to the,
Well, plus the September 30th, 2013 Regency RFA.
right, but still, that was, yes, that's right. So, but now we have a scenario, another part of this decision-making process is that we either move forward with one of three scenarios. We're limiting the field, basically, to we're either going to open up the field to everybody. That's one choice. We're presently limiting the field to those who were in as an applicant. That's one entity, plus plus any, I was going to say there's three, it's only two, plus anybody who they can put a deal together with, and if they put a deal together with somebody who was a previous qualifier and we've checked, then we move forward quickly.
No, that's key here. Previous applicant, not previous qualifier.
The previous applicant, plus anybody who was, who we did a background investigation for, who was a qualifier before, right?
Or a new, which is part of her point, you know.
No, I know, but those are two, we move forward with two speeds, based on whether we've already done a background check or not.
Well, the point is that some are not complete. These background checks are not complete or necessarily,
Well, all right,
because there are new qualifiers to be done.
all right.
Well, the proposal on the table is that we open it up to new applicants. We extend the deadline and we open it up to new applicants. That's what we put on the table to something to be considered and something we wanted people to comment on. So let's take one step at a time, as John set up. Number one, do we want to extend the deadline? I think the answer to that's pretty clear. We do. We're not sure to what.
Oh, well,
Okay.
you might be speaking for yourself, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
That's all I ever do. So let's deal with that question first.
At this point,
Yeah.
I don't know that we may need to extend the deadline just yet. I think we could wait at least until July 14 to consider whether to extend the deadline by whatever amount of time in whatever circumstances we may want, because between now and July 14, there is still at least the mathematical possibility. I'm going to make a reference to all the qualifying with the World Cup. It may be very, very low probability that it will actually happen, but somebody, a current applicant, could still put a deal together, at least technically, between now and July 14. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But
So-
we have, I'm
So
sorry.
extending the deadline between now and then, and allowing other applicants, we may hear from, that party saying, you just changed the rule on us. We were operating under a deadline for a while.
The only question is, should we extend the deadline now? The issue of opening it to other applicants is not on the table.
Okay.
And even the one applicant who has the theoretical possibility of getting in under the current deadline has asked for an extension. So there doesn't seem to be any reason not to extend. They said extend, but don't permit new applicants, but that's the second question on our decision.
But I think they go hand in hand, because extend the deadline to whom? Just that one applicant? Well,
We have to get to that. No, the first question would be, do we extend the deadline, period? That means just the people who are now qualified as applicants.
But I agree with Commissioner Zuniga that I think they do go hand in hand, because if we say we're going to extend the deadline without deciding do we allow new applicants in, then the question becomes, to what end?
that's right.
It is simply to give the current applicant more time to put a deal together. The current applicant has had a year and a half to put a deal together. and to extend the deadline without also opening it up to new applicants means that we're no more likely, in my view, to have a completed deal at the end of the extended deadline than we are today. And at the same time, to leave the deadline in place now is to commit ourselves, is to gamble that they will have a deal together by the time that deadline arrives, and that we are left with a single applicant, which plays against the competition, the desirability of competition, which is thus far, we've been correct in saying it dramatically improves the quality of the product we get. So that, for me, is the dilemma, and why I think the two do go hand in hand. The problem, just to finish the thought, and maybe I'm talking in strains that don't connect neatly, but if we don't extend the deadline, which is an option, then we really are facing the possibility that we get one application, and then, as I think we've discussed before, to say, well, we got one application, which we know today is the most we could get, but we want competition, so now we'll extend the deadline, I think would be very unfair. So we either make that decision.
This is the definition of dilemma. The one only possible who could meet the deadline is asking us to extend the deadline.
That's right.
So, keeping the current deadline, in my view, would give our process a lot more legitimacy to opening it all up to new applicants after that deadline is seen through, provided, of course, that nobody meets it.
I don't disagree with that, just
Right.
to follow that point, but it also means that we may have one applicant, and by that deadline, we may have an applicant by that deadline, and it then would be unfair, I think, to open it up, because we're not happy with one applicant.
Well, I don't want to concede that we will not be happy. It's a big assumption.
No.
It's not an unfair assumption, but getting one applicant in the current deadline may be sufficient. We have to look at it. We would have to look at it. And there's still 60 days after July 14 for that party, if they get a host community agreement, to put a deal together.
Yeah, I'm not saying that necessarily we'd be unhappy.
Right.
I'm just saying we wouldn't have any competition,
Well,
Well,
there is
an element of unhappiness.
there is a unique factor in this region, which is the prospect, however far, likely or unlikely, of competition in that region from the tribe. If we are to give it a commercial license, there's a level of uncertainty in this region that other regions have not had to deal with. So by the sheer number, for us to say that one application would be insufficient for competition, I don't know that I would take that at face value. I know it's not highly desirable, and that's your point, but I don't think it's undesirable.
I think your original argument, Commissioner, was it was unfair because there's a possibility that one applicant could make the deadline. I think that argument no longer exists with the fact that they've asked for an extension. So, and I think it serves all of us well to think about opening it up because of the competitive factor. So I would think your original argument had some merit when, in fact, there was an opportunity for them to meet the deadline. But now that they've asked for this extension, I think that argument no longer exists. So I think we're in good stead to talk about A, an extension, and B, opening it up to others.
Mr. Stebbins, do you want to join this boring back and forth?
I don't find it boring.
No. We're talking about a difference of, 2 weeks, and I understand Commissioner Cameron's point of, you know, the lone name that's out there that has the potential to abide by that date has asked for an extension. It's 2 weeks to essentially let that first kind of self-imposed deadline come and go. And we're back here in the end of July to revisit this issue. We're obviously not revisiting the issue of extending the deadline. That'll be obviously a no-brainer, and the only question at that point in 2 weeks will be, do we open it up to new applicants?
Well, I want to perhaps reiterate that I think the question is goes together. It's one question. Extending the deadline now with an opening of new applicants. That would be that's the way that I would frame it. Extending the deadline now by itself does us no, certainly right now, does us no good, in my opinion.
I would agree they go together. But I just don't see the value in waiting 2 weeks to make that decision.
And we waited 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago. You know, it was a month now.
Yes.
Does somebody want, I think we know what the issues are. I'm not sure we know where we come down on them, but I think we know what the issues are. Does somebody want to put one or the other of these, do you want to put your idea in a motion and let us?
Well, I would move that we extend the deadline and open it to new competition, which serves the whole process well and is not being unfair to anyone.
Do you want to propose a date to which to extend, or do you want to make that a second?
Well, I think most of the comments suggest that the March 15th date is something that makes sense. Those that wanted it sooner were really thinking of their own best interest. And I think that we've been very fair to everyone as far as giving additional time, and so I don't think that serves us well, and I know that's.
So your motion would be to extend to March 15th and to open up to, completely open it up to new applicants.
Yeah, and I do see merit in Director Wells' point that we should have a date before that in which packages need to be complete, because that really does cause, there's turmoil, and it makes it difficult to make those dates when you don't have a completed package.
What is the March 15 date for the RFA 2 application?
That was the original proposal that
I
Ombudsman
modeled the
Samba.
date at the end of March. I'm just
March
quickly,
27.
just quickly trying to make sure the March 15th is not on a Sunday.
Oh,
Right.
okay, yeah.
But March 27 would be the RFA 2 application, is that?
Yes.
That was one of the
That
models,
was it.
correct?
Okay.
Yep.
But if we open it up, we need an RFA 1 deadline.
Does 90 days do it? Is that appropriate? If we made it March 27th?
Well, when we did the, it depends on the deal, obviously,
we
I
have
can
to
do it
pick-
a little quicker if I've got some, prior applicants. But as a point of reference, when we did the slots applications, we had a 4-month window, and we met
If
that.
we wanted to increase
But-
competition, which is what we have been talking about, I mean, in my opinion, an RFA 1 deadline should be after November.
Well, the other option is just on the RFA 1 deadline, that the applicant, presented, the IEB can review it, and I can report to the commission sort of, within a few weeks where they are with it. And there may be applicants that are missing a chunk, say, of their, necessary equity. I don't know.
Could I, before we, it seems to me that we got ourselves into this position because the RFA 1 didn't have to have a completed package. Now, this has been out
Right.
there for now 18 months.
Right.
And our regulations are our regulations, but we could certainly, on a non-emergency basis, by whatever date we pick, change the regulation to say that the RFA 1 application has to have an operator and financing,
And be
both. Those are-
substantially complete.
Right. they're indispensable, or we're not going to take your $400,000. You can't
Correct.
play.
Correct. That would be helpful.
Right.
That makes sense. Would the end of the year be appropriate? That would give just about 4 months.
Well, it would give, so
Three.
it would be 3 months.
Well, March
It would be-
27th.
it
Well,
would be
you're right.
March, it would be February, March, December 27th would be 90 days until RFA 2 was due. And December 27th would be 2 months after Region A is decided. So that would theoretically give the Region A loser, if they wanted to, 60 days to try to put together a deal.
It would be 3 months. December 27th.
Is it
October,
three?
November.
October,
September.
sorry, yeah, 3 and 3, so it'd be
Right.
Yeah,
3 to
so-
put together a deal and 3 for the background checks.
Yeah, my obvious preference would be, a month earlier, so having it due at the end of November. But I defer to the commission.
Or move into April on the
Right.
back end.
Right.
And
If
what
you're
are-
opening it to new applicants, then who knows who could come in? I could be looking at a whole brand-new entity, theoretically, and I just want to make sure I manage the commission's expectations, as we
Right.
would have significant work to do.
I'd rather give you the extra month,
Yeah.
move it to the end of November.
And one additional consideration, we always try to get this done before the referendum. The dates that we have here assume that the referendum is being completed basically 10 days before the application date. But the earlier that you can make it, the more likelihood that the background check will be completed prior to a referendum.
Which is a
for
good thing.
new applicants.
Yeah. Well, so that would, if we made it November 27th, today is what? Today is June, so that's July, August, September, October, November, that's 5
5 months.
months, except for the Region A loser. And the Region A loser would only have 2 months.
Right. But with Region A, for my purposes, if it's substantially the same entities that are going to be applying in Region C from Region A, that's simple for.
No, I
our
meant, but for
purposes.
that, in the remote hypothetical that a Region A loser wanted to try to play in Region C, they'd have to start all over again, they'd have to find a community, they'd have to,
Yeah, right.
who
Right.
knows what would happen.
But November 27th wouldn't necessarily be their deadline if they didn't change anything about their structure or finances.
just
So they'd
who they are.
basically have,
That's for new ones.
they would basically have until March 27 to find a site, negotiate.
That's right, because you don't have, when you make, you can file your RFA 2, sorry, you can file your RFA 1 without a site.
Yes.
Right.
That's right, okay. That seems reasonable to me.
So November 27th is Thanksgiving Day, but,
You could make it December 1st.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, so you
December
want to
1.
restate that motion now? You've got 3 elements, I think.
I move that we extend the deadline as well as open to new applicants the RFA 1 filing to December 1 of 2014, to be followed, and that would have to be a substantially complete application on December 1st of 2014, followed by a RFA 2 deadline of March 27th, 2015?
Second.
If I just may make a comment I would just want to make sure it's clear on the record, new applicants would have to have it substantially complete. I would also want the commission to add that existing applicants would also have to have their deal complete.
So we amend that both new as well as existing applicants must be substantially complete by December 1st.
Correct, thank you.
Substantially complete RFA 1.
Correct.
Right. And can we say what we mean by substantially complete? It has to include financing, operations, and all qualifiers?
Well,
Yeah,
that may be a little too onerous. I think that, identifying an operator and also their proposed equity interest. What the
Yes.
companies may end up doing, if they have a certain amount of equity, they may go to a bank and get financing later, but we can tell when we go through the RFA1 process if we have identified that they have enough equity to go to a financing institution and get the remaining money they will need to complete the project. We went through that with the Cat 1 and Cat 2s. It's, I'll defer to how complete the commission wanted. I would say that would be a minimum. The more we require, the easier it is for me to give you a better picture, but
Yeah.
that would be consistent with what we were looking at when we did the
Right,
prior
and that
applicants.
will also be consistent with the way that actually these deals are put together.
Correct.
There's only, we've accepted, even for the RFA2 portions, letters of credit and letters of intent,
Right.
Highly confident letters from banks, not necessarily actually the financing, but it's the equity that's important here. And
Okay. I would just like to avoid being back here again. So some way, somehow, it seems to me we ought to spell out in advance in more detail, either through a regulatory change or otherwise, what we mean by substantially complete, so that people who are trying to package an RFA1 application have a target to shoot at, and we have a benchmark against which to judge whether they've hit the target.
Would it be,
And with whatever flexibility is commercially reasonable, but
would it be possible to prepare a document that would outline those basic pieces? And then that could be part of what we put up on the website so that people understand. You could probably work with the legal team on
Yeah.
phrasing.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I like the idea of some more specificity so that we don't get into a back and forth. I think that's a good idea.
All right, there was a
And,
second.
and we have enough plenty of time to put
Right.
that
We can work
specificity.
that out.
We could figure out whether a 5% threshold in terms of missing equity participation, for just to throw out a number, would be a range that we could live with,
Right.
as opposed to 100%.
We said the 50.
yeah, and then we ought to revisit that either, as I say, through a regulatory amendment or at another hearing soon, so that people can understand what they need to do.
Before we move into the voting, I would also like to, as a second question, and I know I see this as a separate question, but one that should be immediately talked about, in my view, or soon, is the definition of capital investment. We hopefully get to that in a little.
Yeah, as soon as that's next on
Okay.
this decision tree.
Great.
Any more discussion on this motion? All in favor of Commissioner Cameron's motion signify with aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Did we have a second to that?
Yeah, you
You
second.
seconded.
You seconded.
Oh, I did? Yeah, I did. Never mind.
And we appreciated it.
That was a long time ago.
Jeez.
Now, I think, was the next one the capital structure? The
Yeah, we
capital
burned
requirement?
through 4 out of the 5 already.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Nicely done.
So number 5 is, should the commission revisit its decision on the minimum capital investment requirement?
I think
I'm
we
going to
should.
speak to that, because I don't think I was eloquent enough last time we talked about this. And I think we should, in a nutshell. I think, as I mentioned before, and under the goal of increasing competition, the way we've defined the costs that are to be included in the minimum capital investment, and given the market assessments that we've already done that have this region with the least potential, especially compared to Region A, that we should think about, and I would be in favor of including certain major costs that are presently excluded from the minimum investment calculation, and include those costs. If there's hopefully a situation where we get more than one, say, proposals, that that number will be part of the evaluation that we that we evaluate as it is currently. That a higher minimum investment compared to someone else would be, at least in the finance section, viewed more favorably. It could be a requirement of the city or any one of the towns that they say, even though the commission defines or excludes certain costs, we want you to include, rather exclude. We want a higher capital investment. That could easily be a requirement that they put forward. But for the reasons of getting better responses, in my view, or more competition, we really need to think about those two big categories that I can speak to, either land and or capitalized interest.
Did we, last time we did this, we did take your suggestion about adding infrastructure outside the
Yes.
gaming premises, right?
That's right.
The gaming establishment, okay. So now the other two are land and capitalized interest.
That's right.
Those are the two other major.
That's right.
And I think we also took Commissioner Stebbins' suggestion about fees and stuff, even though those are
Yes.
small money, but we adopted those, right?
Right.
Okay, so land and capitalized interest. Explain to me how that would be a common standard that everybody, in other words, if somebody owns the land today and they're contributing the land as part of the project, do you appraise that and consider that part of the 500,000?
Sure.
You would, okay, so that's how you would equalize
Yep.
it. So, okay, so if anybody, some guy's having to go out and buy the land, he gets credit for that, as does somebody who was contributing the land. Okay. And are those the only two, I guess, if you're leasing, what if you're leasing the land? What would happen in the case of Mohegan Sun?
Yeah, good question. We'd have to look at it. There is a value that you could you could in following accounting principles capitalize the investment that you are putting, even though you're going to make it over the years.
You could somehow compute.
You can compute compute what that is worth.
To me, the issues about the land issue were two. One, Commissioner McHugh said, which is that really adding any value to anything? You know, somebody's getting paid a chunk of, and given the presumed or understood intention here about this was economic development money, the land economic development impact is very slim to none in some situations.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with that.
Okay, but that was one issue, and then the second issue was, could you come up with a structure, a metric, so that each applicant would have equal opportunity to get credit for land values equally assessed, equally determined? And it sounds like you're thinking that on the latter case, the answer is yes, that we could figure out a way that would be generally accepted as giving everybody an equal shot at valuation of the land, and that would then leave Commissioner McHugh's concern.
Yeah.
You feel like we can equalize, no matter which way you're acquiring your land,
Yep.
we could come up with a tool that people would generally accept as fair.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of an art in valuing land and valuing future payments or option payments during a period of time. But somebody can reasonably come up with an appropriate discount rate or value and comparables and or even the appraisal. And there's multiple ways to appraise land. Usually there's a cost approach and comparables, and there's a revenue approach in terms of what those future payments discounted to today would be. But I want to talk a little bit about the notion that land by itself does not go with the notion of capital investment, and I think that we should consider it as to what else is that land doing. And it becomes, in my view, it's the conduit to the whole project. Without it, however much is valued now, that anything that you put over land is going to make that land more valuable, especially if it's a project of this magnitude. And this is a little bit where the art comes in terms of valuing it. But I'm arguing that there's a reason to include it, much like the statute gave us the leeway to do. Now, I actually, the other category, I thought it was easier for us to consider, because the land, kind of, you could argue both ways as to just the merits of counting capital investment. Capitalized interest is usually capitalized under accounting rules, under tax law. And
So play this out. Give me an example. If you're in this model,
right.
give me a hypothetical. Applicant A,
Applicant A has to pay $85 million to us, and he's going to carry all of that cost during at least 2.5 years that it takes to build a casino, and or however long. And the only time that they can start to repay the upfront amount of money is 2.5 years from now. The interest, the amount of interest between now and 2.5 years from now, the IRS and GAAP allows you to count as the capital investment that you've made, and would eventually allow you to depreciate all of that over the life of the asset, 49 years or 39 years, et cetera, et cetera. The bigger these projects, and the longer the payout, the more significant this capitalized interest becomes. It does add up. My initial position of excluding this, I was actually very initially thinking that this would be a cost that we would determine whether to include or not, that we would give ourselves the leeway as to, Attorney Grossman might remember, we had a third category in costs that are included and costs that are excluded. I was suggesting that this would be a third category, costs that may be included, because some of these costs, the ways they are put together with multiple parties, can sometimes be plain vanilla interest, and other times can be ways to profit for one of the financing partners to take profit away from the deal. That starts looking, to me at least, a lot less than the plain vanilla interest that's capitalizable. In either case, I think I was, now looking back at that, I think we should, we could easily consider capitalized interest under generally accepted accounting principles, whatever normally is capitalizable currently, to be included in the calculation of capital investment.
So because we're thinking about amending our regulations because it's a riskier region to do business in, is that your thought on this?
Well, I would say, the first and foremost, the desire that's very expressly here of increasing competition. But the context of that is this region has a little bit more risk when it comes to investing a very large amount of money compared to the other two. I also have now looked at what the state of New York did. They tiered the minimum capital investment. There's also a minimum capital investment. It's lower down up there. But they tiered it depending on the market. The closest that they were to New York City, which is a much bigger market, the higher the capital investment requirement was. The further away they were, up in upstate New York, and the closer they were to existing Indian operations, the lower the capital investment was. And that, to me, I think is recognition that the dynamics of the market clearly define at least in some big way, what could be extracted in terms of capital investment.
To me, the Regency is a dramatically less desirable market for three reasons. One is as Enrique has repeatedly pointed out, the projected gross gaming revenue is 1/2 of Region A and 3/4 of Region B. So it's half the size of another group that's required to put in 500 million. Number two, it's more competitive because you got the slots parlor in Twin Rivers relatively close by. And number three, you have this Damoclean sword of an Indian casino dropping out of the sky at any time. So it's a dramatically different situation, and for business people to be assessing it that way is entirely reasonable. What we have to determine is, what's the sine qua non here? Is the most important thing for us to amend our rules in order that we do get 3 casinos with a lot of competition? Is that the most important thing? Because if it is, then we probably should permit these to come in. If the sine qua non is, don't let there be a facility which is less than a really robust destination resort, and that has the most leverage on its impact dollars. In other words, you put dollars into payroll rather than pay dollars into interest, then maybe we don't want to. So if the market can't sustain a casino, then we weren't told we had to do a casino here. It said we could do up to 3. If the market can't sustain a casino, that's all right. Then the tribe comes along someday and pays us 17% rather than nothing. So we sort of have to try to figure out, what are we supposed to be doing here? It's clearly a difficult market, and if all we're trying to do is, within the rules, within the law, give the maximum chance for a casino in southeastern Mass with the most potential for competition, if that's what we're supposed to be doing, then I think Commissioner Zuniga's suggestion is a good one. I'm not 100% sure that is what we should be doing, but I think that's the question.
I'm glad you put that question, because I don't think that is what we should be doing. And it seems to me that that's the path down which we started when we began this discussion about about what we would include in the capital costs and what we wouldn't. And we excluded the land costs, the capitalized interest, and the external infrastructure, because we wanted the money to go into the facility. And we wanted the money to go into the facility because the facility that had that money would be more likely to draw out-of-state revenues and recapture external revenues than a facility that didn't have that capital investment. And it seems to me that paradigm still holds true. Nothing's changed. The difficulty of the market, I understand, and the market has talked to us about that, is there. But I don't think that we are in the business of authorizing a casino just because we can. I also think that the legislature made a clear difference between a slots parlor and a Category 1 gaming establishment. The slots parlor is more likely to draw customers and money from the immediate region around it than these Category 1 casinos are. And the closer the more we allow money to go into things other than the casino itself, the more likely we are to get a facility that has qualities that draw from the immediate vicinity, rather than attract money from people who come from out of state or recapture money that's going elsewhere. Beyond that, it seems to me to change dramatically now is to alter a competitive, potentially alter a competitive assessment that the existing licensee designate and our current licensee applicants may well have made, and that is, what are the barriers to entry for a competitor in that region, and what kinds of competition are they going to face? And to change dramatically what we're doing now to potentially allow a third competitor to come in under circumstances not then envisioned seems to me to be unfair to them. So my bottom line is, I don't think we are in the business of, or should be, in the business of authorizing a third casino because we can. I think we ought to authorize a third casino because we are convinced that it is intended to do what the legislature wanted us to do in terms of recapturing money and out-of-state new out-of-state dollars.
I think that's a great argument for the future. I think what we're currently, the decision to grant a license in that region or not, I think the decision that we are currently doing is a solicitation decision. And in order to spur competition, and then we'll see it. Then we'll see the quality, then we'll see who, if anybody, surpasses the minimum capital investment and in what way, and how much, and how does it look, and et cetera, et cetera. I am advocating for the decision today to open it up, just like we did, in a fashion that, at least in theory, can elicit the most responses, and then, back in April or May of next year, we have a lot more information than we do today. We hopefully have more than one or proposals to evaluate. We look at the landscape and we see how things are, and we can make that decision to award or not. We've always had that, ability.
What do you think? What do you think of that, Commissioner? I think that's an interesting.
I think it's a very interesting point. I think that the dynamics of the process will inevitably drive us to award a license to somebody. I guess I fear that the dynamics of the process will drive us to awarding a license, even if it doesn't meet the high standards that we set for the other.
Well, we'd still have to be convinced that produces enough revenue.
I know. Intellectually, you're absolutely right. But by then, you've got an enormous amount of energy behind a variety of different proposals, and saying no to all of them is, I think, at that point, very difficult. Not impossible. May happen. It's not impossible. But I would rather say that this is what we're looking for, and we welcome anybody who's prepared to comply with those requirements.
Remember, well, we're not doing that in a vacuum, because we already had how many months of people trying, but not at least one of them exiting in some part, in some reason, from the comments that they provided, because of the risk relative to the minimum capital investment.
Right.
So it's not an exercise in we have a lot of information. We're coming at this after having had a period of open solicitation without an actual result. Right. And the other competing element that we have here is a region that has told us a number of times, don't leave us behind. People in the city of Fall River, New Bedford, and elsewhere, officials from there, when we've gone to hearings down there, that say, we also want the benefits of that can come from these economic development projects. So I think because they also see that the timeline with the tribe is one that is very hard to assess, et cetera, et cetera. So the way you describe it, Mr. Chairman, as absolutes, I think there's a lot of or extremes in those competing priorities has all these other elements as well.
Well, somebody else?
I just had a question about, and I see what you're saying in the case of New York, but are we considering changing the rules after two regions have had to abide by them? Is that a disadvantage to those folks?
They have a much larger market, which is which we now know a lot better. They they are at least in Region A, they're clearly surpassing the minimum capital investment. They don't need the inclusion of land or not, because the market is driving them to because both competition and the market is allowing them to invest a lot more. They could attract people internationally and out of state, and they have every incentive to doing it by building a larger facility, one with more amenities, et cetera, et cetera. So, that is, I guess, the difference with Region C, which is surrounded by ocean without major airports, as certainly not, Logan Airport. So, I think that, as I've said before, we should include certain costs in the minimum investment calculation that are presently excluded for that reason.
Well, somebody want to put one or the other of these in a motion?
I'd be happy to. And I could break them up into different categories if it's going to be a mixed bag, I guess.
I sort of hear land and interest or nothing. I don't hear land or interest or
Okay.
nothing. But,
Okay, so it's one or the other.
well, go ahead, do a different.
No,
one.
I am, it feels like if we're, talking about both, that's a real significant difference. And should we be discussing maybe just interest or something, since land is very complicated? I'm just not, I'm not clear on this one.
Is there a percent of a deal that finds itself in capitalized interest? I mean, I know how you assess capitalized interest, but I'm even trying to get a sense of what the impact would be in having it part of the calculation of the half a billion dollar investment.
You mean percent?
Percent of the
What
project.
percent of the project? I have very, very. I would have to run certain numbers, I guess, or ask some of our consultants. It's a one category that could represent, a large, but not a very large.
Like $5 million, maybe something like that?
No. It could be more. It could be a lot more than that. It could be, $40 million over the term of 2.5 years. Once you're done with, or a little bit more, depending on what the sources are and your cost of capital. It all depends. I guess, if this is part of the question you may be getting to, Commissioner, but I know it gets very complicated. We could cap relative to some percentage how much applicants could count towards in either of these categories. We could say, land cannot represent more than X percent of your total investment. Even if it does, we're just going to let you count X percent. If we were really troubled by, having very different costs between applicants because somebody already owns it or because somebody already has to come and lease it or has to come and purchase it. There would be a level of, judgment and arbitrariness to that, but it could be done. It's a mathematical calculation. Same thing with the capitalized interest. We could say no more than X can be counted towards the minimum capital investment because we are not comfortable with what an outlier somebody could be.
And it's your experience that many deals of this magnitude include interest?
Yeah.
So we were being, initially when we decided not to include that, it was pretty much outside of what is typical in a deal of this size? Or?
Well, I tell you, I will take the full responsibility for this. I think I was going a little too nuanced. I was envisioning the possibility that somebody could count capitalized interest that is really a profit distribution or a payment distribution between parties. Because if you are the financing arm of a project that gets put together and all you do is collect a rate of return and the project is able to capitalize that interest, that would be, not in the spirit of the intention. However, in every large capital investment project, there, people can capitalize the interest.
But aren't we mixing apples and oranges when we talk about that? We're talking about financing costs and what your financing costs are, what your costs of capital are. That's one thing. We're talking about what you get credit for in tax.
Yes.
And it can include in depreciation, which is a tax, is a piece of the tax. And then we're talking about our statute. And our statute talks about what you put in the ground. And those are not necessarily, none of those three is necessarily the same.
Which is
What it costs you to get the money doesn't necessarily determine what your tax rate is, because how you get the money has an implication on the tax. The taxes don't necessarily correlate to how it costs you to get the money, and none of that necessarily tells you what you're putting in the ground, for purposes of our statute at least. So I think I think, for me at least, I have to separate those when I look at it.
I'm not sure I follow. What tax are you talking about?
Income tax, capital gains tax, the various taxes that you've been talking about. You're talking about
No,
depreciation and
No.
you can capitalize interest for tax purposes, we were talking about?
Yeah, but there's no. Okay, let me clarify. In order to calculate your, to do your taxes, the IRS lets you capitalize interest. And that's an accounting procedure.
I understand accounting procedure.
Your taxes are not going to count towards the capital investment. I hope
No,
you're
I'm
not suggesting
saying
that.
I'm saying that
Okay.
the fact that you can capitalize your taxes, your interest for tax purposes, doesn't necessarily mean you should be permitted to capitalize them for purposes of our statute. That's all I'm saying.
So for Commissioner Cameron, you said, so by us setting that aside, did that mean we were doing something different from other big deals? That is.
We don't.
This isn't, because this only pertains to our statute. What is defined as within that $500, and the legislature gave us some discretion. We
Yes.
didn't do anything that was abnormal in the big business financing world. We just chose to make one element not includable within the context of our statute. So we weren't like an outlier in the way we were constructing this.
No, I know we have total discretion
And it's-
with this matter.
And it's totally idiosyncratic to this situation, too.
Well, but what is generally understood as capital investment includes capitalized interest.
True.
And that's my point when I mention GAAP and the IRS. So it is often done.
Okay, I guess I see merit in both arguments here. I see merit in, look, we really wanted the money to be spent. We wanted this to be a first-class resort casino. That's the intention of the legislation, although they did give us some discretion. And I also see merit in the fact that this is different. Regency is different. And if it helps to consider maybe one of these options, I'm just saying personally, I would be more inclined to be persuaded that interest would be something we could consider, where I feel like personally the land is, and we're really including a lot, and do we get away from that original thought of, look, we want this to be a first-class facility, and, are we making decisions based on a third casino as opposed to what does the market drive here? So I'm just exploring, not considering the two together.
Okay, and I could certainly make the motion later separately, but we're in agreement, sounds like, or maybe, on the capitalized interest. But I'll still make an argument towards the land, which our statute specifically gives us the discretion to include the land or not.
I understand that.
And, because I'm going to suspect that the policymakers, those writing the statute figured, well, how do you count land? It's a big piece, and we're also trying to get money to be invested here or not, and we're just going to leave that up to the commission, which is what they did. Given everything we now know about the region, about the market, and about, actually, some of our applicants told us, consider including land.
Well, of course, they're going to ask for anything, everything, so
Well, no,
that's-
they didn't ask for everything.
Well-
They asked for these two in particular.
which are the two
and,
most significant pieces.
Yeah, the two most significant pieces. Because, it's very clear from the statute that we have that,
I understand.
that discretion.
Yeah.
So,
John, am I correct that we've only had, I can go back to the comments, but there's only been one individual or one party that raised the issue or asked us to include?
no, go. I'm sorry.
No? Go ahead.
Were you talking about land or?
About land.
We've had a number of parties that have asked us to revisit our minimum capital investment requirement. The city of Fall River has been steadfast in opposing any changes to the minimum capital investment as indicated before.
But they don't understand.
Well, the city of
How it
Fall,
works.
fundamentally, the city of Fall River is not making the capital investment. I mean, with all due respect to the
Right.
city of Fall River.
And they don't understand the way it works.
Or it was shorthand, correct? Yep.
But did any other commercial party request the inclusion of land?
So let me just look back at the,
There's the
Comments.
nice summary chart that you gave us in the packet.
It doesn't break it out, though.
I'm just trying to remember who broke it out, who just more generally talked about the requirements.
I'm just remembering some of the comments we had the first time we talked about it. And there was an applicant that is no longer,
I mean, specifically MG&E,
No, yes, KG called for it, so there's at least two.
KG and MG&E, and Claremont and Clairvest incorporating the MG&E comments. And then, I can't remember if anybody else has specifically asked for that. Town of Bridgewater, I think just more generally on minimum capital investments, rather than breaking it out. But KG specifically broke out the two and asked for both.
Do we have more discussion? Commissioner Stebbins, did you have other questions or thoughts before we see if we can get a vote to do one thing or another?
No, but I would agree with my colleagues to take these separately.
Take them separately? Okay. Do you want to,
sure. So on that note, I would move that this commission amend its regulations either by the regular course or on an emergency basis to allow for the inclusion of capitalized interest in the calculation of the minimum capital investment for Region C.
second?
Second.
So this is to include
Just capitalized
just capitalized
interest.
interest. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
That would be 3. Opposed?
Nay.
That motion carries 3-2.
And I would further move that this commission amend its regulations either by emergency or the regular course of promulgation to include the cost of land in the calculation of minimum capital investment for Region C.
And the cost of land means you'll help us come up with some metric that standardizes all kinds of acquisition.
Right, right. Subject to the further evaluation of how that land is calculated.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay. That motion fails 1-4. I guess that's the name of that tune.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we adjourn just for one quick second?
Yes.
Commissioner McHugh will pick up. I have to dash out, and there will then be a Region A topic. So why don't we give a quick break, and then Commissioner McHugh will pick things up.
All right, we're prepared to resume now with the remaining elements of the agenda, of which there are two, one of which has subparts. So we'll turn to item 7, the legal division, and General Counsel Blue.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We have next up on the agenda an update from Mr. Grossman regarding his meeting with the Department of Banking on the ATM question that we've been considering for the last meeting or so.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As you'll recall, there was an issue presented before the Commission relative to the placement of ATMs at gaming establishments. There is a provision in the banking law that says that no electronic branch, which is essentially an ATM, may be located upon premises where legalized gambling occurs, other than the state lottery. So we set out to figure out what the application of that provision is and what effect it would have. And to that end, Chairman Crosby and I have met with the Commissioner of the Division of Banking and his staff to set in motion a discussion to try to reach some conclusions on that front. And essentially, what we've determined at this point is just that we need to do a little more research, reach out to the applicants, licensees, and get a sense as to the use of ATMs presently and prospectively at gaming establishments, and take a look at how other states handle the issue. Circle back with the Division of Banks and try to come to some type of understanding as to how the provision at issue will be applied, and report back to this commission with our findings. So anyway, this is intended just as a status update. That's where we are, that we have begun looking into the issue.
Are there any, I think it's good that we try to canvass the waterfront, talk to the banking commissioner, obviously. Are there any regulations in place now as to what that provision of the statute means and how they interpret it?
There is a regulation in place, but it largely mirrors the statute. It has a few additional nuances that don't necessarily resolve the issue.
Right. Really didn't consider this environment because it didn't exist.
Well, our understanding was this law was put in place, decades ago in an effort to deal with bingo halls and the like, and wasn't necessarily put in place to deal with gaming establishments.
All right. Any other questions, comments?
No.
So I'm sorry, you may have said this, but what's the next step on this?
We're beginning to try to formulate an interpretation, a legal interpretation of the statute in conjunction with our own statute, which makes reference to ATMs. But in part and parcel of that is gaining a clear understanding as to A, how other states handle the issue, and B, how our licensees and prospective licensees would even want to use ATMs. So we get a sense as to how big the issue actually is. And that won't take too long to figure out that latter part. But the former part, I think, will require us to go back to the Division of Banks and work this out with them, as ultimately it's their statute, not ours, that controls this issue. They're the ones who approve the placement of ATMs, ultimately. So in some respects, regardless of what we think about it, they would need to sign on to our view.
All right. That sounds like a good course of action. Thank you. The second element.
We have before you today the surveillance and administrative search regulations. They have come before you once before, and they were out for informal comment. we are asking Director Wells and Mr. Band and Ms. Lilios to talk to you about any changes that have been made since then, and then request that you vote to move them through the formal process.
All right.
Yeah, good afternoon
Good
again.
afternoon.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to formally introduce Assistant Director Bruce Band. He's on board. He's been invaluable to us, bringing 30 years of casino experience to the IEB, and he has been the one taking the lead on reviewing the surveillance regulations. That is his area of expertise. I'll defer to him on any particular comments he may have for the commission on the text that's before you today, but my understanding is this is the version that we would like to go for formal public comment and for further go forward in the process.
Well, I've forgotten, this is the first public meeting that Mr. Band has, the Deputy Director Band has been with us. Welcome aboard formally.
Thank you.
You've already become invaluable, so I feel familiar already, but it's very good to have you with us, and
Thanks.
we look forward to working with you and to profiting from your advice and your experience. So we'll hear what you have to say on this subject, if anything.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I think that we only got a few comments from the outside on this. I don't have both of them
Yep.
here. One was from Mohegan's Son, and we discussed them amongst ourselves. We also got some comments from one of the camera manufacturers, and I think we really kind of determined that the points that they made were non-issues at this
Right.
time.
Yeah, I think that we can certainly consider that as we go forward with the process, but there was nothing in the comments that we received, and I think Mr. Ban is in agreement, that would have us change what we were suggesting be forwarded for public comment at this time. We're confident that the version we have before you today is the best thing for the commission at this point, but we are always open to discussion. We can have further conversation with Mohegan Sun and their comments, but this, I think, is the best version to go forward, and then we'll continue with the process.
So the version in the packets now is the version that you'd like to have a vote to send out for the formal period of public comment, and then ultimately, after we digest those comments, come back and we'll look and see what turns out.
That is correct. And if there's any questions by the commission on any specifics in the proposed regulations that are before you, I think Mr. Band could probably be the best to answer those.
All right, any questions or comments?
Yeah, I just had a quick question, and it came up in one of the site visits that we did to another facility, was, and you talk about how the camera will be positioned, nothing obstructed. It's in a manner that will prevent them from being obstructed, tampered with, and disabled. If they're high up enough above, and maybe this gets to an internal controls discussion later at some point,
Yes.
but putting something in their way which obstructs them from doing the job.
Usually with the height of the ceilings in casinos, it's not an issue, but you get into some of the hallways and back in the cashier's cage and so on, that it can, because you might just have an 8-foot ceiling. Surveillance should really be on top of anything that obstructs the view of any of their cameras.
Right.
It's just something you kind of have to put in the wording, for they know that they have to be vigilant about that.
And with technology today, does the height of the ceiling have anything to do with the ability to monitor what a camera's supposed to monitor?
No, you can just really zoom in on a lot of the, from just about any distance. And with the added magnification in some of the digital systems, it's never an issue.
All right,
And then we also have did you have a question, Commissioner?
You needed approval, I was just going to.
Oh, yeah, and so that, and then, I don't know if you could do it together, you may want to do it together. I have Attorney Lilios on the administrative search regulation, she handled that.
And this regulation also was brought to you, I think it was on May 12th, and put out for the informal public comment. We did receive one comment from Mohegan Sun on this regulation as well. This is the one that deals with the regulatory monitoring of the casino and slot licensees, as well as the licensees and registrants who work at those gaming establishments. The Mohegan Sun comment is not reflected in the draft that you have before you, but again, we're asking for this to go out for the formal comment period, which would give us more of an opportunity to evaluate that comment. The draft before you does have two changes, and this is the Regulation 142. It does have two changes from what you saw on May 12th. The first change is reflected in 142.02, and we have added an area subject to inspection, and that is to include persons licensed and/or registered under 23K. Really, it was contemplated all along that persons would be included, but it seemed to make sense to explicitly include that in the regulation, both to give notice to licensees and registrants, also in the event that when and if this is reviewed, judicially reviewed, explicit mention of it would lend to the interpretation that the commission has interpreted in that way. And this is, although our Supreme Judicial Court has not had the opportunity to review this, obviously, similar language has been reviewed by other state Supreme Courts. The other change...
And reviewed with an outcome that validates the regulation.
Correct.
Right.
That the scope of monitoring anticipated, required for the gaming environment is to reasonably include inspections and searches of the person for licensed and registered individuals on premises.
All right.
As a matter of the regulatory
Right.
regime.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And the other change or addition is in 142.02 subsection 2, which allows the commission to examine records. The prior version included at the gaming establishment. This version includes or any place where the subject records are maintained. And that is meant to take into consideration remote servers, the cloud, for example. These would be records continued to belong to the gaming establishment, but in the event that they are actually not under the physical roof. So with those changes, we are asking, consistent with 141, the surveillance reg, that the commission vote to put these to the formal comment period.
Does the latter change, would the latter change include records stored impermissibly in somebody's basement?
I think it is viewed that these would be records in the possession of the gaming establishment.
All right. It's an interesting question. We can revisit that at the end if we need to. Yeah. All right. Other questions? All right. Somebody want to make a motion?
Mr.
This
Chair.
is to put them out for formal comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd move that the commission approve draft regulations 205 CMR 141 and 205 CMR 142 for the purposes of initiating the public comment phase of the regulatory process.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Ayes have it unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Blue.
Item 8 before you today is a request by the City of Chelsea for a hearing to vacate the arbitrator's award selecting the applicant Wynn Mass LLC's best and final offer as the surrounding community agreement between Wynn and Chelsea. Chelsea's petition to vacate is included in today's commission package. That petition to vacate also includes a copy of the arbitrator's decision, and the arbitrator's decision has an attachment, the best and final offer. Wynn and Chelsea were unable to finalize the surrounding community agreement. Pursuant to the Commission's regulations, the parties went to arbitration. The regulations provide that a party to arbitration may file objections to the best and final offer submitted by the other party. 205 CMR 12501 states that if a party does not file an objection to the best and final offer, the decision of the arbitrator becomes final and shall not be subject to further review. Chelsea did not file objections to Wynn's best and final offer. Wynn filed objections to Chelsea's best and final offer. On June 9th, the arbitrator issued its decision selecting Wynn's best and final offer. On June 11th, Chelsea filed a petition with the Commission requesting a hearing to vacate the arbitrator's award. The question before the Commission is whether or not to grant a hearing on Chelsea's petition. If the Commission determines that a hearing is appropriate, a hearing on the merits of the petition would be held at a later date. So there is no need to get into a discussion of the merits today. Representatives of the City of Chelsea and Wynn are here today to present their arguments to the Commission as to why the Commission should or should not grant a hearing. Each party has been advised that they have 10 minutes to present their argument to the Commission and that no briefing material should be submitted. Are there any questions so far?
Not so far.
All right, if there are no questions, I'd like to ask Attorney Josh Monahan, representing Chelsea, to come forward and address the Commission. Attorney Monahan will be followed by Attorney Starr, who will address the Commission on behalf of Wynn.
Great, thank you. Mr. Monahan?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Commission.
Good afternoon, Mr. Monahan. Thank you
As
for your patience in waiting.
very informative while I was waiting. As General Counsel Catherine Blue mentioned, my name is Josh Monahan. I'm here on behalf of the City of Chelsea as special counsel by contract with the City of Chelsea. Essentially, the issue with regard to whether or not the Commission grants a hearing, I do concede that within the regulations, as was mentioned, that there is a time period for fundamental inconsistency petitions as objections. Our motion to vacate, the City of Chelsea's motion to vacate, was done so after reading the final report of the arbitrator. We do not take lightly the fact that this is a motion to vacate. We understand that this is a pretty high standard in terms of other arbitration procedures, but we do believe that it is within the Commission's authority to grant a hearing, and we also believe that it's within the Commission's authority to vacate this final report. And the reason why we do this is because we believe fundamentally that the decision as is, on a couple of points, exceeded the authority of the arbitrator in making this final report. Now, granted, we're not here necessarily today to argue the merits of this. We believe that as a backdrop to requesting the hearing, the Commission probably wants to understand if there is any merit at all before granting a hearing. Essentially, the City of Chelsea argues that the arbitrator, in fact, acknowledges that he did not take into consideration, and in fact, consciously refused to take into consideration a Commission decision. And we refer to the handbook that's provided with regard to binding arbitration, which states that among the statutes, the regulations, and the Commission's prior decisions regarding surrounding communities, that those things are what the arbitration process is subject to. The City of Chelsea, at the closing arguments, provided information and provided a supplemental memo thereafter to the arbitrator regarding what we believed was a decision that should be taken into consideration by the arbitrator. We believe that that decision and the actual deliberations of the Commission during that May 2nd hearing, which was regarding a fundamental inconsistency petition, we believe that the decision and the deliberations would have been informative, if not dispositive, to the arbitrator's decision, specifically with regard to what standard should be used when awarding or determining whose best and final offer is fair and reasonable and meets the statutes, the regulations, and is also compliant with prior Commission decisions. Essentially, that decision that was made by the Commission on May 2nd, and again, the deliberations, speaks to what we believe is the correct standard of review, or rather, not review, but the standard for mitigation, which is that the applicant, the licensee, has an obligation to identify, address, and minimize potential negative consequences of their operations. Now, throughout the arbitration process, there was some discussion back and forth regarding what that standard should be. As you'll note in both of the decision by the arbitrator, he admits and concedes the fact that this was something that was a question. But instead of going with the standard of does the best and final offer identify, address, and minimize potential negative offers, the somewhat nebulous phrase of almost a totality of the statute, the language of the statutes and the regulations is used to support why he made the decision that he did in his final report. Unfortunately, there's no other language from the statutes or the regulations in the final report backing up that decision. In addition to that conscious disregard of a prior commission decision, the City of Chelsea also argues that there are a few points. One, he also considers positive impacts in his final report as offsetting negative impacts, which explicitly in the Handbook for Arbitration on the very last page states that in no way should those positive considerations or positive benefits be used to offset negative potential impacts. Additionally, and I would say this one is a major concern for the City of Chelsea, and I think it speaks to potential future issues with reopening provisions and other surrounding community negotiations as well. The arbitrators actually substitutes reopener regulations and general mitigation fund availability for WIN's affirmative duty to mitigate negative consequences of their operations. I think that in essence, when you're allowing allowing the reopener provision and allowing the possibility of other funds being available to somehow negate the duty of an applicant to mitigate these issues, that's beyond the scope of what the arbitrator's there to do. Lastly, because in totality, this final report, this binding arbitration, is supposed to result in something that's both fair and reasonable, but also it's supposed to be consistent with the Gaming Act, the Commission's regulations, that essentially this final report is not consistent with the Gaming Act and the regulations. Again, we don't take this lightly. We greatly respect the work that was done by Judge Neal as the arbitrator. However, the fact that there just seems to be a void of statutory basis in this, that's what piqued our interest and now brings us here today requesting a hearing on those merits so that we might see that we can argue at least that the arbitrator did in fact exceed his authority in this. Just as a last point, this surrounding community agreement, the final report essentially is becoming the surrounding community agreement. It's going to stand and have impact on the City of Chelsea for years to come potentially. It also, I think, this decision stands to inform future negotiations, future arbitrations, whether or not that's something that's ongoing or future reopenings. If that's the case, I believe that this is an opportune time to reaffirm the fact that the arbitrators are supposed to be held to the statute, supposed to be held to the regulations, and also the guidance that's provided in the handbook. So with that, again, I thank you for your time. Again, we don't take this lightly. We understand that this would potentially set us up for an additional future arbitration if in fact there was a hearing and the result of that hearing was to vacate this decision. But if you do have time to read and you do see that the arbitrator in fact exceeded his authority, or you believe that there's at least merit in that question, we do argue that there should be a hearing on this matter so that we can proceed. So thank you again for your time.
All right, sir, thank you. What do? You didn't mention in your discussion the provision of our regulation that says there's no appeal.
I believe that, again, is in reference, more or less, is in reference to the fundamental inconsistency petition. There's ample law out there with regard to arbitrations for commercial arbitrations for collective bargaining in communities, both federal and uniform commercial arbitration statutes that allow for a court to vacate a decision if it was made by an arbitrator in excess of their authority.
Right, but we don't have any such law in the Gaming Act, and we don't have any such law in our regulations. In fact, to the extent we've spoken to the issue at all, albeit in the context you just described, the regulation says no appeal.
I do believe that the backdrop to this, again, has been fairness and reasonableness, that the agreement is supposed to be fair and reasonable, that this process is supposed to result in a fair and reasonable agreement. The process getting to that point also is again, underneath the statute, the regulations, and the handbook, it's supposed to be a fair process. If the city of Chelsea had known from the beginning that the arbitrator could exceed their authority, I would argue that this would have been maybe subject for a lot more questioning before we entered into it, or we would just simply say, in the instance of reopener provisions or substituting in some kind of nebulous understanding of what the standard is, what is the value of the arbitration if it's not being held to the statutes, if it's not being held to the regulations, and if, in fact, the commission has the authority to even supersede that decision and change the end result, change the final report, change what is going to be the surrounding community agreement, that it's also within your authority to vacate if it believes, after a hearing, that the final decision was made, again, when an arbitrator has exceeded their authority. I would concede that in the regulations itself, it does state that this is not subject to further review, but I believe that is with regard to if we haven't filed a fundamental inconsistency petition, which the city of Chelsea did not file. It was only once we received the final report and we realized that the decision was being made in excess of the authority of the arbitrator that we felt it necessary to file this request.
In regard to the first, and I've read your memorandum, we've all read your memorandum, but in regard to the first of the issues that you raised, the arbitrator basically said that in view of his decision, he didn't have to decide whether the dialogue in our prior discussion of the MGM issue was a decision of the commission or not. Is that square with your understanding of what the issue is?
That is
What
square
he
with my
said,
understanding,
right,
Your Honor.
yeah.
I do believe that he had the opportunity, because we did file a brief explaining that, in fact, this dialogue was, in fact, a decision.
But if there's a question, of that kind, doesn't the arbitrator have the power to make a decision one way or another as to whether that's a decision that's binding on him?
Your Honor, I would suggest that the fact that this was, again, and we argued that this was a commission decision, that we, in fact, checked with the general counsel of the commission to see whether or not the transcript and the vote that was taken in the transcript constituted a decision by the commission. That was something that was requested by the arbitrator himself as something to guide the process. The handbook states that this process is subject to prior commission decisions. That was a prior commission decision.
Yes, but what a prior commission decision is it a written decision? Is it an issue as to which a vote was taken? Is it a consensus conclusion that emerges on a transcript? Is it a failure to act when the commission could have acted? All those things could be commission decisions, could they not?
I believe, yes, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Under 30A section, under 30A, the way that we actually backed this up and the way that we supported this in our memorandum to the arbitrator himself was that we suggested that because there was quorum, because there was discussion had, all of the procedural standards were met for the commission, that just as today, as you took votes today, what you did in that transcript as the only format available was in fact a decision.
Right. But doesn't the arbitrator have the power to disagree with you on that? There wasn't a formal vote on that issue. There was a formal vote as to the best and final offer and to whether to upset the best and final offer decision of the arbitration panel in the areas where there was a claimed fundamental inconsistency. But as to whether or not there was a decision, that wasn't of particular, we didn't decide that was a commission decision that bound future arbitration proceedings.
I would suggest that this is the perfect example why there should be a full hearing on the matter.
Help me again with that.
I think the fact that this is something that could be, again, supported with the arguments that we had previously made and also submitted copies of to the general counsel, the fact that this is a question as to whether or not the decision could be ignored or determined to be not a decision by an arbitrator is part of that, whether or not he has exceeded his authority.
All right, I hear you. Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
I suspect you just answered it, but I need to, in terms of, this all gets us back to the request for a hearing. But really, help me understand why you think that the arbitrator exceeded his authority. Is it because of that conscious disregard of the decision, of the discussions of the commission relative to the MGM arbitration results?
I believe that's one of the pieces, as well as the fact that at times there are positive benefits used to offset negative benefits, that there is a lack of actual statutory or regulatory language to support the decision. I believe also we've outlined that there's also a substitution for the reopening provisions and general tax-funded or general funds through the Gaming Commission, that there was no evidence whatsoever suggested this is something that was going to be definitively provided to the city of Chelsea, used to offset and in fact negate the duty, the affirmative duty of the applicant to again identify, address, and minimize the potential negative consequences. That to me is at odds with the statute and contradictory to the statute. And as part of the final report, part of the reason we are arguing that that this was an excess of the authority of the arbitrator.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Counsel, Mr. Starr.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Tony Starr on behalf of Wynn, and with me at council table is my colleague, Jenny McCarthy, also an attorney at Mintz-Levin. Let me start by telling you what did happen. As General Counsel Blue said, Chelsea and Wynn were unable to agree to a surrounding community agreement. And therefore, the arbitration procedure set forth in the regulations was triggered. Chelsea and Wynn agreed to have Judge Neal, who had served on the trial court for many years as a Superior Court judge and now is a distinguished neutral at JAMS, serve as our sole arbitrator. Once we had Judge Neal in place, we exchanged, as we were required to do, our best and final offers. We exchanged them and submitted them to Judge Neal. Thereafter, Judge Neal held 2 scheduling conferences during the first couple weeks of May to work with the parties to outline a process for the presentation of evidence, and a hearing was set up. The parties provided Judge Neal, before the hearings actually began, with extensive pre-trial briefs, pre-arbitration briefs. We then met with Judge Neal for 3 full days. 10 witnesses testified under oath, both direct and cross-examination. 35 exhibits were marked. At the end, and Judge Neal asked many questions. At the end of the presentation of the evidence, Judge Neal asked the parties to prepare post-hearing briefs, which we did, and then he asked for a post-hearing oral argument or closing argument, which we had, and then even at the end of the post-closing argument, he allowed both parties an opportunity to submit post-closing briefs. The issues as to which of the best and final offers best met the statute were clearly presented to the judge, and he issued his decision. Wynn's BAFO was selected, and Chelsea's was not. And the reason we're here has nothing to do with whether or not Judge Neal exceeded his authority. It has everything to do that Chelsea failed to persuade Judge Neal that their BAFO was the better choice. This is nothing more than the complaint from a disappointed party to an arbitration. Chelsea's particular motion with that backdrop fails for 3 principal reasons. I think General Counsel Blue outlined the first one, which is, of course, that under 205 CMR 125.016C, the arbitrator's report is final and binding. It reads, in the absence of an objection filed in accordance with 205 CMR 125.016C6, the decision of the arbitrator shall, that's mandatory language, be final and binding and shall not be subject to further review. I don't agree that that language is solely to do with a fundamental inconsistency petition. Of course, that's what would allow you to have something after the arbitrator issued his or her report, would be if you filed the fundamental inconsistency petition. But this language is not limited in that sense. The decision of the arbitrator shall be final and binding and shall not to be subject to further review. Chelsea did not file the fundamental inconsistency petition. Therefore, that report from the arbitrator under your clear regulations became final and binding and not subject to any further review by this commission at that time. As soon as that happened, that's it. It's final and binding by your rules. Chelsea requests a hearing under Chapter 30A. I took a look at Chapter 30A, Section 10, and I'll read it, but I know you'll take a look at it later. When, under any provision of any law, a hearing is required only upon direction of an agency or upon request made in accordance with such provision by a person entitled to make such request, the requirements of this chapter governing the conduct of adjudicatory proceedings shall not apply unless and until such direction or request is in fact made. Here, your regulations clearly state that unless a fundamental inconsistency petition is filed, the arbitrator's decision is final and binding. So under the very act that they're asking for you to set up a hearing on, Chapter 30A, because they didn't file the fundamental inconsistency petition, they don't have a right to a Chapter 30A hearing. That's reason one. Reason two, they failed to exhaust their administrative remedies. Again, under your carefully detailed regulatory scheme, they had the ability to file a fundamental inconsistency petition to preserve the ability to come to you in the event their BAFO was not selected and to point out deficiencies or ways in which the WIN BAFO did not square with the statute and the regulations, was fundamentally inconsistent. They didn't do this. This commission has had an opportunity the first week of May at your May 2 hearing to talk at some length about what that type of a hearing might look like. On May 2nd, Ombudsman Ziamba explained, and I quote, "This process was not meant as an appeal of an arbitrator's award. It was meant to cure the fundamental inconsistencies with the statute." General Counsel Blue added, "If the commission finds that a provision of the arbitrator's award is fundamentally inconsistent with Chapter 23K, the commission can modify or amend that provision." Chairman Crosby, at page 26, said, "We will stay focused on exactly what this was when it came up, which is a very narrow and specific function that we are meant to be protecting." And Commissioner McHugh said, "My view is that we have a very narrow standard." Very different, apparently, from what they're asking you to do today, which is to conduct a hearing to set aside the arbitrator's award in its totality. Again, the objection to the final report, from my perspective, my client's perspective, is simply an attempt to get a second bite at the apple. We don't agree at all that Judge Neal exceeded his authority under the Act or the regulations. I'm glad that they provided you, attached to their motion, a copy of Judge Neal's report. Under your regulations, you actually don't particularly spell out what the report should or shouldn't have in it. All it really needs to do to be compliant is to select a BAFO. Select which one. Judge Neal went further. He shared quite a bit of thoughtful information with the Gaming Commission. He explained the standard that he chose to use, which I believe is right in line with the teachings from some of the statements made by the commissioners at various times. It lines up squarely with the regs. It lines up squarely with the handbook. And he also detailed for 7.5 pages the evidence that he considered as being probative on the critical issues in the case. He thoughtfully reviews all that and he evaluates it. And at the end of the day, he concludes that Wynn's BAFO is a more fair and reasonable one and better addresses the impacts that were brought to his attention. Again, the problem is that Chelsea didn't meet its burden of proof. It was unable to persuade Judge Neal that the impacts that they wrote about in their BAFO were in fact reasonably related to the construction and development of the Wynn facility. The commission, as I said, addressed this issue in other ways on May 2nd, and I think your statements on May 2nd line up right with the standard that Judge Neal articulated. Commissioner McHugh opined at page 48, the clear import of the statute is that there be a clear nexus between impacts of the facility and the remediation cost of those impacts. Judge McHugh again at 53, the thrust of the statute is to mitigate the adverse impacts of the project and not allow somebody, town, subcontractor with the town, to reap the windfall. And finally, with respect to the West Springfield provision, Commissioner McHugh stated, the monies to be consistent, not fundamentally inconsistent with the statute, have to be used to mitigate impacts. I think when you think about what several of the commissioners were saying at that time, it lines up very well with what Judge Neal shared in his decision. The goal of the arbitration is to arrive at a fair and reasonable agreement between the applicant and the surrounding community. That's right from your handbook. The role of the arbitrator is to select the BAFO that is the most fair and reasonable and adequately and reasonably compensates the surrounding community for any adverse impacts. Your handbook sets forth considerations for the arbitrator in arriving at his or her final decision. There are 12 factors in total that they're listed on page 7 and 8. And the arbitrator in his final report says, reading the statute as a whole and the regulations in the handbook in light of the statute and considering the evidence and presentation of the parties, the arbitrator concludes the BAFO selected and incorporated herein satisfies the statutory and regulatory standard. Furthermore, he says, in selecting one of the BAFOs submitted, the arbitrator has considered and evaluated factors permitted by Chapter 23K and the Commission's regulations, including but not limited to the factors listed in the handbook for binding arbitration at 7 and 8. Chelsea apparently comes to you and says, just disregard what Judge Neal wrote. He must not mean what he said there. He laid out clearly what he did. He followed your rules to the best of his ability. And Chelsea is saying to you, oh no, he didn't. Set it aside. Now, the part about the decision, and Judge McHugh, your questions were right on point. Two things about that. In your handbook, you list 12 factors, one of which is prior commission decisions on matters relating to surrounding communities. But you say that these 12 factors may be considered by the arbitrator. You don't say must, you say may. You don't say shall, you say may. So in the first instance, even if he didn't consider one of the 12, that would be his right under your rules, because you made it permissive, not mandatory. The only mandatory piece of information that the arbitrator is required to receive is he shall receive other surrounding community agreements. If you go back to your handbook, you only use the word shall once. So these were all permissive. And I think Chelsea tries to mischaracterize Judge Neal's footnote, Arbitrator Neal's footnote, although I think in the colloquy with you, Judge McHugh, they conceded it. He didn't set aside the decision. That's not what he said. What he set aside was a determination of whether or not the colloquy, the selective dialogue that Chelsea asked him to look at, the selective comments that Chelsea thought helped them, he said, I don't reach that decision now. But he did not say that I am rejecting your decision. He said, I am just not reaching the question whether or not The full transcript is a decision. That's what he said. From Wynn's position, Chelsea's request that the arbitrator's decision be set aside should not be allowed. The request for a Chapter 30A hearing should be denied. The idea that this commission has somewhere in its authority, in its regulatory authority, the right, after you've said that the arbitrator's award is final and binding, that you have the right to vacate it with all due respect, that does not appear in your statute or in your regulations. You've set up a careful process that was well adhered to. Both sides were afforded ample opportunity over 3 full days and 10 witnesses, countless exhibits, and multiple briefs to present their cases to the arbitrator. He made his selection. He's well documented it. It should stand, and the request for further action on this should be denied.
All right, Mr. Starr, thank you. Questions for Mr. Starr? All right.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. All right, as I see it, we have a couple of choices. First of all, we're not deciding an appeal. We're deciding whether there should be a hearing on the objections. And that's a subtle distinction, but it's an important one. So we're not deciding the substance of the claims that the arbitrator exceeded his authority. The second thing is we have the power to go ahead and deliberate now, or we have the power to think about this until the next public meeting, deliberate then, after thinking about it, and come to some conclusion. We are not in an adjudicatory hearing, and so we can't retire now and contemplate things and talk about it and come up with a decision that we publish later on. We've got to do the deliberative and decision-making process in public. So we have the choice as to whether we want to deliberate, want to think about this, read the materials again. Trust we've all read them once, but read them again in light of the arguments, or whether we're prepared to move forward. And I think that's the first decision that we ought to make.
I'm prepared to deliberate now and make a decision.
Comfortable with that?
I'm fine either way. We can reread them. We can look at transcripts, or we can decide now as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Well, let me just offer a couple of thoughts, and then we can talk about it and see if we can reach a conclusion. It seems to me that if we start from the proposition that the regulation says that the award of the arbitrator is final and binding, and there is no place in the regulations for an appeal. We have a limited right to come to the commission if something is fundamentally inconsistent. We said, and when we drafted that was a very narrow escape hatch from the arbitrator's finality under a very limited set of circumstances. But apart from that, the arbitrator's award was final and binding. That is consistent in a broad and general way with the way arbitration awards are typically viewed in other contexts. The arbitrator has broad powers, and the arbitrator's decisions are subject to review and displacement, if you will, only in the narrowest of circumstances. Secondly, notwithstanding the absence of any formal authority to review the arbitrator's award in our regulations, it seems to me that there must be some inherent power to look at awards that are egregiously outside the pale of a reasoned approach to problem solving. That just doesn't make sense that you wouldn't have some power to do that. And so the question for me would be whether this award on its face or in any of its aspects met that standard of being egregiously outside the pale of reasoned decision-making. And I must say that I find it nowhere near that standard. That on its face, it is a thoughtful, thorough approach to the problem with which the arbitrator was presented, which was which of the two awards, which of the two best and final offers he was going to accept. He picked one, as he was required to, and gave reasons for doing so. So to the extent that we do have discretion under the regulation to entertain some kind of a hearing to set aside processes and decision-making processes that are egregiously beyond the pale of reasoned decision-making, I find that this decision on its face, or as explained to us at today's hearing, it doesn't come close to that standard, and I therefore would be prepared to deny the request for a hearing on the merits to delve further into any issues that may emanate from what the arbitrator did or did not say.
I would agree. I do not think a hearing is warranted. I have not been persuaded by information today that the arbitrator's award was anything but fair and consistent, and it's binding.
I agree. You put it very well. I don't think the the decision was, as explained and articulated here, the decision was very much in line with the design of the procedures. They were designed with to pick one or the other, of course, with all the other exhibits and arguments, etc. And I think it was followed clearly. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no. So I'm not I'm persuaded by your argument, and would be inclined as well to deny the petition to vacate or to have a hearing on this matter.
I would join with the three of you in agreeing to that.
All right, could we have a motion then?
I move that the City of Chelsea's request to have a hearing with regard to the arbitrator's decision is denied.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is carried unanimously. All right, thank you both very much. Now, one more motion is in order, and I look forward to the person who will make it.
I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And unanimity continues. We're in adjournment.